a gun in the face.
Then all of a sudden, they all kind of lined up. They pointed their guns at me. And this is the point where I thought, I'm going to die today.
Started 2 years of horror for an American in Venezuela.
They said, you need to give us your phone and get ready because you're coming with us.
I'm Becky Bruce, and I spent a year researching and piecing together Josh and Tammy Holt's story about their ordeal in a notorious prison.
That's when everything started to turn bad. We had another pound on the door. Boom, boom, boom. And there was the police once again.
You can binge all of the episodes of Hope in Darkness on kslpodcasts.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, but more importantly, it's a podcast about recovery. I'm Casey Scott, that's Dr. Matt Woolley, and it's with a full heart that I get to say this. We are doing some great things here, and I know that just by our love on Facebook and Instagram, and when I'm out and about, people come up to me all the time and go, hey, your podcast is amazing, and they might not even have an addiction, but they like the theme of the podcast, they like the way it goes, and, you know, I want to say thank you to everybody, and people will go, hey, this is amazing that you're doing this, and I want to go, well, I'm glad you like my story, but my story is just a small part of what this podcast is about. It's truly about the guests who come on and share their stories. And like I've said before, I think it's the stories and the details that people really relate to and can find some commonality in.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, I've been really delighted. I wasn't sure how this would go beyond telling your story, and the reality is they're starting to create kind of a community around this issue of addiction and recovery. Certainly, I think the majority of our guests have been people who have been addicted at one point in their life, but we are starting to have other people on the show who are friends, relatives, family members of people who are struggling with addiction. And so it's the community of people that are affected by addiction. If you think about your own family history, everybody's got somebody that they're close to who's struggled with addiction in some form or another. And so I'm really glad to be part of it.
And we've been talking mostly about alcohol and illicit drugs as the addiction. But coming up next week, we actually got somebody coming on talking about pornography.
Right. We've teased that a little bit in the past, and it's a little bit harder to find people to come on and talk about the behavioral addictions. And I'm excited to maybe blow up that stereotype as well and get people looking at the fact that people are addicted to substances, but they're also addicted to things that are called behavioral addictions, gambling, pornography, etc. And so that's going to be exciting.
And so that's what this is about. And so the addiction, the illicit drugs and alcohol is just a small piece of the pie that we want to do here on Project Recovery. We want to keep this going as long as you will allow us to and kind of tackle all things addiction and in recovery.
Right. I mean, the common theme, regardless of what the addiction is about, is that when a person gets past the addiction, when they become sober and free from it, the whole world brightens up. Their whole life becomes more what they always hoped it would be. And that it includes how their friends and family experience life as well.
It's beautiful when you're in it and when you can see it on somebody else. Another thing I want to say about addiction is people go, well, I tell them about the podcast. And they go, I'm not addicted to drugs. And I go, well, it's not really that. I said, chances are you're probably addicted to something. And in the simplest form, to me, addiction is giving something else power over you.
Yeah.
And, whether it's your cell phone, your video game unit, Diet Coke, and all those, they're a little lesser degree, but it still is an addiction.
I mean, yeah, they are. Certainly, maybe they're a little more insidious and take a little longer to take over. But I've worked with several kids in our community who have it's ruined their whole educational experience, these video game addictions. And so that's something that we'll talk about in future episodes. What does a parent do when it's more than just a desire to play a video game, when it's really an addiction? Or what do you do if you have a spouse who has a gambling addiction or a pornography addiction? Like how that affects a family can be just as destructive in many ways as drugs and alcohol.
And we want to say thank you to our community out there because we do listen to you, and we want you to be a part of this because without you guys, there would be no this.
Well, we get great, the feedback's amazing, and the suggestions are really appreciated, and some of the guests that we've had on recently are people who are part of that community and listening and wanting to feel like they have something to share to benefit everyone, and I think so far it's been wonderful.
And some of the direct messages I get is, I really like your podcast. I love it, and I like how all of these guys come from a darkness and enter lightness, and to see them striving and doing so well now. But what about the people who don't?
Right. We have told we've had a lot of people come on and share their story, I guess we could call it, of success.
Yeah.
Where we've talked about their rock bottom and the ways it's affected their lives and the lives of their family. And then now they're in recovery and they get to talk about what they're doing. Many of our guests are giving back to the community in great ways. But the truth is that there are a lot of people, unfortunately, who are affected by addiction to drugs and alcohol, and it doesn't turn out that way for them. There isn't that same sort of ending. And
their story is hard to tell unless you can get a loved one or a family member to come on.
Right.
And they can't necessarily tell the addict's story, but they can tell their story.
Which I think is as important as the addict's story. I mean, there are people who aren't addicted who listen to this podcast but have loved ones that are, and it's important for us to bring people on who are willing to talk about that experience as well.
And today we are gracious, we are happy, we are lucky to have Emily. And so tell us a little bit about Emily, and then we'll introduce her.
Emily is a mother of three and works here in the community, lives in Salt Lake, Provo area up in the Wasatch Front. And she recently lost her husband within just the last month to drug addiction to opiates. And she is found herself, dealing with the aftermath of how has this affected her and her children and her family, the community. Her husband, Brian, was a very well-liked and involved person in the community, and we wanted to give her an opportunity to come in and kind of talk about her experience that's ongoing, absolutely. It's really new and I think kind of a raw experience for her, but the opportunity to come in and talk about what her family's going through and where they're headed in the future.
Now, behind the scenes, we like to sit down with our guests before they go on and kind of tell them what's going to happen. And we sat down with you, Emily, and you said something that really resonated with me in the beginning. It says, I'm here to tell my story because I can't really tell Brian's story because that's his story to tell. Right. So let's start from the beginning. What happened?
I don't know.
Tell us a little bit about how you and Brian met.
Okay.
You were married for how long?
10 years.
10 years. And where did you guys meet?
So when we met, I was in school at the U, and he was actually in school at SUU. So we met through mutual friends, and we were kind of long-distance daters for a while.
You must have really liked each other.
We did.
That's
we
really
really
long
liked
distance.
Yeah. So, but he would come up to Salt Lake periodically to visit his buddies, and we would all kind of hang out, and that's how we met.
Okay. And what attracted you to Brian? What kind of guy was he?
So, Brian is one of the best guys. He I think my favorite thing about Brian is... Sorry.
No, you're okay.
My favorite thing about Brian is that he is so sincere. He's kind, but that's such a catch-all phrase, but specifically kind in that he's not sarcastic in any way. So he never teases anyone or pokes fun at anyone, even if he's like trying to mask it as like, no, I'm your buddy, but I'm really like riffing you or something. He's just a sincere, sweet.
He sounds genuine.
Yeah, he's genuine. Yeah. So that was like the clincher for me. I was like, this guy's just super nice, super sweet. He's funny. Just, goofy kind of funny, like just likes to do like impersonations and voices. And he was just like a really good teacher or coach. You know, we would go golfing together, and I can't golf worth beans, but he's really skilled. But he would make it fun because he would say, you know, stand this way, grip it this way, put your head this way, and all of a sudden I'm playing the game and he's making it fun because he was such a good coach and a good teacher.
Because normally that's a recipe for a fight, is trying to teach a loved one how to do anything.
Especially golf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the fact that he could do that and you were playing it and you wanted to learn speaks volumes about him.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'd never played before, but he could make it so I could actually like kind of play along with him because he was so good at that coaching.
So you fell in love with him.
Yeah, like almost immediately. So he's just and handsome. I mean, just all around good guy.
So for everybody out there, let's talk a little bit about Brian. Where did he grow up? Is he a Utah boy?
Yeah, he grew up in St. George, and he's such a St. George boy. Just there's a loyalty to all his childhood friends in that community, and they just remain friends like forever. Like you're just buddies forever.
It's like the mob. Group. Once you're in, you're in.
It's totally like the mob. It was kind of weird for me because I don't feel like my growing up experience was like that, but we'd go back to St. George and he just always run into people, you know, it's just left and right.
It's that small town community that so many people keep coming back to as they get older.
Yeah. And, you know, just really athletic kid, but just loved to hang out with his friends and play sports and loved his family so much. Yeah, just great guy.
Did he come from a big family?
Yeah, 5 kids. Same as me, actually. The oldest is a sister, and then he's surrounded by boys. Lots of boys in that family. Lots of fishing trips and camping and stuff like that.
So it sounds like, in a lot of ways, kind of the ideal, you know, Southern Utah family, close-knit.
Yeah, they're a great family.
Yeah.
As a dad, and I've got a daughter, I would like to find her someone like Brian.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so when you guys were dating and courting and all of that, Brian, what was his drug of choice?
There wasn't one that I knew of at that point.
So there was no hint of party and lifestyle?
No, that's not Brian. Mm-mm.
And Brian, my understanding was kind of do the right thing sort of guy, tried to kind of follow in a path that he felt was the right path to go on. I know he graduated from high school down there, served an LDS mission, and came home and got involved in school and actually wanted to work in criminal justice.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
What did he do? Tell us about that. So
he started out as a deputy. He didn't patrol. He worked in the jail and housing. That's not actually what he wanted to do, but he was interested in law enforcement and crime scene investigation. But he started out there and ended up doing a lot in booking. So he booked people, and so he's got some crazy stories there. But
that takes a certain type of person, having been booked.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it
is hard to put up with you,
because
Casey.
you're seeing people on their worst day, their worst moment, and you have to get them through this process and calm them down and be a counselor, a therapist, a father, all these things.
Yeah.
And so it takes a certain person to do that, and after time, it's I mean, I got to imagine it wears on you.
I would imagine that would be a pretty tough job.
He had the skills, though. He was good at being the professional where, you know, they taught him, you know, you can't, like, be their buddies when they're in jail, but you got to treat them with respect, and you got to... But he was really good about that. I know he was a really good worker, and people like working with him, and he did treat inmates and people that were getting booked in with respect.
Yeah, probably just sort of like your story about golf.
Yeah.
You know, that calm and patient guidance helps a person, like Casey said, on their worst day. So I can imagine that was a good fit for him in the career.
Yeah.
How long did you guys date before you got married?
2 years.
Okay. So that's not the normal Utah story.
That's an eternity in Utah.
That's a really long time.
We were long distance for a year.
Yeah.
And then he moved up, and we dated another year.
For a year, and
that's right.
And got married.
Yeah.
And during any of that time, I think I know the answer to this, but was there any indication of drugs and alcohol or that sort of thing?
No.
No,
there was not.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit then about how long did he work for? Well, tell us where he worked. Utah County.
Utah County, yeah. So in the jail there, not the prison, which gets confusing. So, but then he, in the last few years, he worked in crime scene investigation. Mm. So he took the pictures, he did the fingerprints, and he got called out late at night for crime scenes, and so it was more stressful for sure on him.
And heavy. I mean, the topics are heavy.
Yeah.
I mean, to get called out at late at night, opening the door, not knowing what you're walking into, and
none of it's good.
We've had a lot of people who have reached out on Facebook and Instagram and through email, and it's the first responders. I mean, that is just taxing on your body, your mind, your soul, because a lot of times you're seeing people, once again, at their worst time and seeing the worst things that you can imagine.
Tragic moments. Did he ever talk about how that affected him?
A little bit, but I think there was a lot he kept to himself. And most of the situations were not too bad, but I know there was one particularly that rocked him, and he never really talked that openly about it, but I just know that it was hard.
Yeah, that is hard, and I think people that we would consider first responders are also tend to be people that have that balance between they're caring and they want to help, but they're also kind of stoic and tough. And so I think one of the concerns from a mental health point of view is how do we help somebody like Brian or other people that they are these tough guys, but how do we help them work through some of those traumatic events that they experience so that they don't just stuff it and keep it to themselves. That's kind of a hard balance because those personalities, they need to be tough, but then sometimes that toughness doesn't benefit them.
And he probably didn't want to share a lot with you because he didn't want to worry you, and he didn't want every time that phone rang to have you worrying about him. He was probably trying to be a protector and make you feel at ease with what he was doing.
I think he was. Yeah, I think he was trying to protect me from a lot of the bad stuff he had to deal with.
Yeah. And unfortunately, speaking of bad stuff, there was a turn in the road for Brian.
Yeah. And I don't know exactly. I have theories, but I don't know his story, so I don't know when it started. So I know there was a shoulder surgery though, and he had 3. But the last one was a redo on one of his shoulders. And it did not, his recovery was rough. He was in a lot more pain. I think they give like a spinal block initially before, you're on your meds. But it didn't seem like it worked. So he was just in really excruciating pain day of surgery when I took him home. Like throwing up, like it hurt so bad. And he refilled a prescription, asked for a refill. And when that was through, there were withdrawal symptoms, and they were scary. They were mood altering. So you could tell he just felt really bad because he was just so, I don't know how to describe it. It was like a depression. It was really solemn and grim because it was just bad withdrawal symptoms. And after that, though, I thought we were good. So but then it gets foggy on details like that. So it was never, he hit it really well.
A stranger with a gun came upon 2 teens taking pictures under a rising full moon. But violence is only the beginning of this story.
Sometimes I thought There are no miracles. Yeah, there are. And this is a big one.
I'm Amy Donaldson, and I've spent my career talking about how lives are undone by violence. The Letter is a podcast about how lives are remade. Follow The Letter at theletterpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And as addicts, we learn to hide it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, unfortunately, that's part of the game. It is concealing it from everybody.
Well, I mean, there's, a person like Brian and so many others that get, in this case, with a prescription, get hooked. They're using the prescription to deal with the pain of the surgery, and then an addiction happens and they go through the withdrawal. I mean, that's tough. And I'm glad you mentioned the mood altering, because we think about the physiology of how difficult that is on a person's body, but therefore it affects their mood in a way. They become kind of a different person. Yeah. And it sounds like maybe you saw some of that. And that's such a horrible place to be for a person who's used to being an honest, straightforward person. Of course, you want to hide this addiction from others. And so I'm sure he wanted to protect you from that as well.
And especially being where he worked. You know, I mean, that's an added pressure right there.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know, I mean, a lot of times he's probably booking in guys who are, addicted, doing these things, and in his own head wrestling with, am I addicted? What's going on? Now, of course, I'm only saying this because this is what I imagine, but this isn't Brian's story. This is your story.
Yeah.
And so I want to find out more about you. So when was the first time that you realized that there was a problem?
It was way, way much later, years later. I mean, it wasn't even really... I didn't know it was like a problem until February of this year.
Wow. Okay.
And when was the shoulder surgery?
That was like 5 years ago, or a little longer.
And so we're not exactly sure, but during those 5 years, something must have been going on. The use and abuse of the pills was happening to some degree. Yeah. But you didn't know. You thought things were going well.
Yeah. If I try to get into that, I think I'm just gonna mess it up. I don't know what. There was use. I don't know how much. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know really anything.
Did it affect your relationship, though? Did you feel like there were relationship issues that were hard to understand?
Yeah, because it does, it changes a person for sure. So I felt like there's something going on, but I don't know what it is. And we tried to talk about it, but without coming out about the root cause of the problem, you can't really fix those things. But I wanted to mention in one of my books, as a it's for family members and loved ones, it mentions addiction, it's like a disease, and they compare it to pneumonia. And I think that's like the only similarity they share, is that they're both diseases, because addiction hijacks the brain, and pneumonia doesn't do that. I mean, people with pneumonia don't deny that they have pneumonia, and don't do things to try to, usually to stay sick. It's more like Alzheimer's or like diabetes, where there's some shame involved and you don't want people to know you have it. And especially with Alzheimer's, like they're walking around looking like your husband, but they're acting so different. And it's... And you don't know what you're dealing with, because you don't know the depth of the problem, because they keep that from you. And unfortunately, there's a lot of shame involved with it too, which I think, what I like about this show is hopefully we can help dispel all the shame involved with addiction. Because what if you could say, I have this disease, and you were just like, yeah, give me help, instead of hiding it. People are going to think I'm a bad person, and they're not going to want me around them, or something like that.
Absolutely. We need to get rid of that judgment that's in our community and in our assumptions about the person who has the disease. But I love your analogy. It is much more like Alzheimer's than it is pneumonia. It definitely hijacks their personality and their ability to think clearly and function. And just like families who are dealing with a family member in early stages of Alzheimer's, we don't understand, why are they acting strange? Why are they different?
No.
You know, shame is horrible because it's in addiction and it's also in recovery.
Sure.
I mean, you know, it's just that, the ability. And that's why, like you said, that's what this show's about, is we want people to talk about it, because unfortunately this is happening to families all across this state, all around the world.
Oh, sure.
And, if the more we talk about it, the more likely we can realize that there's people out there helping us and there. Now, you said, for 5 years or roughly in between there, your husband was acting different. You guys would fight and you would try to figure it out. And that resonated with me because when I got sober, my daughter goes, "I can tell you're sober, Dad, because I can hear it in your voice." I mean, there was mannerisms and there was things that I could do, and my ex-wife and my kid would know, and I wouldn't even have to tell them.
Yeah.
They would automatically just know there's something not right. That's not my dad in there. There's his eyes are glossed over or something, but that's not him.
Yeah.
And so you guys would try to talk about it, but without addressing the issue.
You can't. Yeah, you have to get to the root of it, and we couldn't get there. And I think shame had a lot to play a part in that. So yeah, if we can help dispel shame and just get help earlier on, I don't know if I think that's key.
Now, as a loved one, and you said that you knew something was off and something was right. Did you blame yourself for any of it? Did you think maybe I'm not doing something? Because I know when I came out and my mom was like, I wish I could do something. I go, I blame myself. I go, why do you blame yourself? It wasn't you. But I think as loved ones, they take on that blame and they go, maybe it's something I did.
Yeah. Without knowing the real problem, I felt all kinds of crazy emotions too. Yeah, you feel guilty, like I'm not a good wife, because I know you're not telling me something and something's weighing on you. And so we should be able to talk about this, but it just didn't seem like we were ever really addressing it because that part was really hidden from me. But yeah, but February is when it all blew up.
So let's talk about that, because something that some people who follow the news, they might be aware of what publicly happened with Brian. Can you talk a little bit about that part of it?
Yeah.
Or how you found out, I guess?
He got a call from one of his sergeants, so I drove him down, and, he was given the option to quit. But
can we talk about what happened? Why did the sergeant call him in?
There was some reason to believe he'd stolen some drugs from work.
And so some people who follow the news might be familiar with that part of the story. It did come out earlier this year that was the accusation, and so the sergeant called him down and gave him the option to resign. Is that right? And what did he do?
And he did.
He resigned.
Yeah. So.
Is that how you found out?
No, I found out just right before that, maybe days before that, where his behavior was so obvious, because before there were, maybe he was a little flushed, or his eyes a little bloodshot, or he would have maybe more sweaty or something like that. But it wasn't, those things are kind of vague. So, but right before we got the call, he was very altered. And so I knew, I was like, oh, this is...
Did you kind of call him out on it at that point, ask him what was going on?
No, and so a little bit of backstory too. There's earlier in February, at the time he was just a 5-month-old baby. He had RSV and was hospitalized for 8 days. It was a really stressful time for Brian too. I think that kind of spiraled. It must have, I tell what he was going through exactly. But then when we got home from the hospital, the symptoms were just so obvious, more so than they ever had been. And so he wasn't even really making sense, but I took him to the doctor, and he would only go under the assumption that he has RSV too, because he can't say what's really going on.
He wasn't allowing himself to come out with it.
No, there's a lot of denial. And so I said, okay, let's go get your flu checked out. And then you run into dead ends there because he's not telling the story to the physician. And so there were a couple ER visits after that. And ultimately, I had to get him out of the house. Luckily, there was a safe place for him to go. I sent him to his parents' house in St. George.
What did you think was happening with him at that point?
I knew there was a problem, and I knew that he needed help. And I also knew that it wasn't safe for him to be around me and the kids. And so it was never like, you get out.
I don't care where you go. You're just not going to be here.
It was not like that. It was like, I love you. Go stay with your parents who will take care of you and can watch you, because I got to go back to work tomorrow and I got my babies.
And you were trying to manage a situation that you didn't have all the information for, but you knew something was really wrong.
Right.
So he goes down to live with his parents in St. George.
Yeah. And so at that point, we talked about, you got to get into a treatment program. We lost insurance because he lost his job, and we had that through him. So there was a little bit of a scramble for me to up my hours enough to get some insurance so that he could get into a treatment program.
Okay.
And there too, I wanted to just mention, because I think I definitely pushed him into treatment. It wasn't like I've hit my rock bottom and I want to go get help. He wasn't in that place.
Yeah.
But I was like, I could see it. You need to get some help. And so, so he went, and he told me later, with a lot of anxiety, he didn't know what it was going to be like, and he didn't know what they were going to make him do. And
the unknown. I mean, it's scary.
Well, sure. For most people,
they have no idea. Yeah. And it's a good thing.
You had no idea.
I had no idea. Right. I mean, I thought I was going into a white room with two guys in jackets going, this is it for the next 45 days. Yeah. Enjoy, buddy.
Unfortunately, TV is kind of our reference point for a lot of unknown things.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's no longer living with you. No. He's been fired. Yeah. He's living with his parents, and now he's got to go do. I mean, that is a lot.
Yeah, it's
to process.
A lot of stress.
Yeah, it's a lot, and he definitely had anxiety about it, and there was just a waiting period too as we waited for insurance to take effect. So for a while, he was just kind of hanging out, and I know that were rough times for him. Mm. We were still talking every day. We FaceTime, read books together over the phone to the kids at night. I mean, it was still like, you're in our life, but it's just, I don't feel safe with you in the house. So we tried to make that time work like that. And then, but once he got into treatment, a lot of people feel like, it only works when you're ready. And well, in hindsight, you can see how that is true, but there's benefit to getting started on something.
Yeah.
I could see so much. There was improvement in the way he talked about himself, how we talked to each other, just because he was getting help and he was learning skills that he needed to learn, and it was helping.
No, I agree that. I often say on this podcast, I mean, you've got to want it to take it. But for a lot of people who go in there for other people's reasons, once you're in there, just the fact that I was in there for 2 weeks without any alcohol in my system, without anything, your brain starts to heal. You start to see things a little clearer. And it starts to set in.
When you
And that's probably, yeah.
In the business, what I do in psychology, there's a lot of research on behavior change, of course. And one of the key vital factors to behavior change comes before a person is ready to change, and that is stages of contemplation, where a person is thinking about prepping their brain to make the leap to change the behavior that's so hard for them to deal with without help. And so I often feel like a lot of our guests have talked about having several visits to a rehab before they finally get sober. And I believe that for a lot of people, it just takes that process of contemplating and, like you said, learning about himself. Here is a guy, and tell me if you disagree, Emily, but somebody who is pretty wrapped up in the shame and embarrassment, and probably even to himself, being willing to admit to himself that here I am, I'm a good person, I'm an educated, thoughtful, loving father and husband who has a job where I help other people, and it's hard to admit that you might have this problem that's got a hold of you. Yeah. And so it's a process of contemplation, and sometimes that means a while in various types of treatment.
Yeah. I think it takes a while to own up to the situation.
Sure.
And on my side too, because I want to speak to the side of the loved ones who are dealing with it too, we're in shock and denial too at first. When I first saw the blatant symptoms and I thought I got to take you to the doctor, it was still a shock. Like you're driving and you're looking over and you're like, this is Brian, this doesn't fit.
It doesn't fit the narrative of who he is and what your lives are.
I can't believe this is happening. It's a lot like, I was just talking to my counselor yesterday, a lot like stages of grief, because you're just, so there's shock and numbness, and then there's sadness, and there's, I don't know what other stages there are. There's guilt, and and all
anger
within,
sometimes.
Anger, for sure. Yeah, so it's really overwhelming. But I am glad that I pushed him into treatment instead of waiting for him to, I don't know, get to some point where he,
because it doesn't sound like he was getting close to that on his own.
No, I don't think he was quite there.
So you said after a couple of weeks in the rehab facility, you noticed changes.
Yeah. It was going to be like a 3-month program, so he did about a month. And there were really positive changes. So he was learning a lot. I think he really liked his therapist. He really liked the people in the program with him, and he was having a good experience.
Did he talk with you then more openly about what had been happening with him?
Yeah.
And it started to shed some light on answering some of your questions?
It did, yeah. So the conversations were going a lot more smoothly, a lot better, and we were making ground, so we were making some improvements.
Was this a 24-hour, was he inpatient at this, or was
outpatient.
He was outpatient? Okay.
It was 4 days a week.
Okay.
3 hours a day.
And then the rest of the time at his parents' home.
Yeah, and then he was getting he had another job, just that to help pay the bills, so he was cutting cabinetry and countertops and stuff, and he liked it. It was physical, and he was getting him active and moving, and those are all really good things.
So just to get everybody up to speed, this happened in February of last year.
Of this year,
and it's August. So, this is a short amount of time for all these changes.
Yeah.
and at the same time, you've got 3 kids at home. You're going to work.
Yeah.
You've got, the public scrutiny, all that, family, friends. And so this is a lot to bear for you as well.
I got into a support group pretty early on, which I am so grateful for. It's and I really hope that people listening to the podcast, if they're in my situation, they can have that somewhere. It was my safe place where I could vent, and the way it's set up where people can't attack what you just said, they aren't allowed to, is brilliant, because it just lets you say what you need to say, because you need to have that as the family member of the addict. You need to have and you need to see all the other people in the circle who are dealing with similar stuff, and there's so many of us here.
I remember when I was at Pinnacle Recovery, we did family night, and my brother and my mom came. And we were talking, and my older brother, he's funny, but he knows a lot about everything. So he just starts talking and going back and forth, and we have some conversations, and then the therapist goes, hey, you know that you guys need therapy too, as family members of addicts.
Yeah.
And every family member looks and goes, I don't need therapy. I don't have the problem. And they go, I know you don't have the problem, but everybody, if you're a loved one of an addict and you've gone through this, therapy would help you out immensely.
You need that support.
Just because of the stuff that you're dealing with and how to deal with the addict and know the boundaries and work on the things that you need to work on. I mean, I'm a proponent of therapy. I mean, you picked a good career, Matt.
Hey, thanks. Yeah. I think about what you're telling us today, Emily, and I'm thinking about, wow, she's dealt with all that confusion and probably feelings of isolation and frustration, and then the courage to force a husband into some treatment who wasn't even telling you the whole story at the time, couldn't even admit it to himself. And that's so much to go through while raising an infant and having 2 other kids and going to work full time. I mean, part time, and nothing moms do, I think, is part time. Moms are full time,
hardest job
all
in the
the
world.
time. And I'm glad you found that support group. Is that something that you have continued to have as part of your life, or are you just in the individual therapy now?
And that's a good question that you bring up, because I feel like I don't fit the parameters of my support group anymore, because I'm not.
Because he's...
Yeah. Right. So I haven't been back for a while. There needs to be another support group for people like me. I don't know if one exists, but I do have my counselor. So...
You're getting emotional, and I think this should probably be the time to talk about Brian, because you said after a month you noticed changes.
Yeah.
What happened then?
Oh, he could just communicate his feelings better, which is just, can be so hard to do, to have to just label an emotion and say, this is what I'm feeling, and this is why, and, or I don't know why, but I feel it. And he wanted to talk more openly about his history and his past, and he just had more hope, I think, for the future. So it was really good to see.